This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. A diplomatic row over Euro 2020 and homosexuality. Hungary's Prime Minister cancels his visit to the big match in Germany, and the EU says Hungary goes against European values.
This bill clearly discriminates against people on the basis of their sexual orientation.
Our other headlines: leaders from the UK travel industry rally in Westminster to protest against COVID restrictions.
The UK denies Russia fired warning shots near a British warship in the Black Sea.
Little progress between the United States and Germany over the Nord Stream pipeline dispute as America's top diplomat returns to Europe.
And up for auction, the beginning of the Internet, the original source code to the World Wide Web for sale. The President of the European Commission says Hungary is breaking fundamental EU values by banning LGBTQ educational content for children. Ursula von der Leyen says she'll raise legal concerns with Budapest and use all available powers to guarantee the rights of all EU citizens. 14 EU countries have now signed a declaration expressing grave concern at the Hungarian law, with the dispute blowing up ahead of an EU summit.
Meanwhile, as Hungary prepares for its Euro 2020 clash with Germany and Munich in just a few hours' time, clubs across Germany have promised to light up their stadiums in rainbows after UEFA said Munich could not. Well, we'll talk to our correspondent Penelope Lurch in Budapest in just a moment. First, let's talk to Tony Waterman, watching events for us in Brussels. Tony, it's being touted as the EU versus Hungary, but only 14 countries have signed this declaration so far. Is this an East-West split, and does it mean that others who have not signed support Hungary?
Well, Jamie, there are certainly countries in Central and Eastern Europe that share similar views on LGBT rights as Hungary. You may remember that earlier this year there were dozens of small towns in Poland which declared themselves LGBT-free. So this does tend to be a more conservative part of Europe. And interestingly enough, a number of these countries that have not signed on to this declaration decrying this new bill, Latvia, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, Bulgaria, these are countries that have also not yet ratified the Istanbul Convention, which aims to prevent and combat violence against women and domestic violence. So there is critics of that treaty, though, say that it is really a plot to promote LGBT lifestyle. So there is this clear division ideologically when it comes to this issue. And certainly the Western lot here making it very clear that they believe that this bill violates and goes against the fundamental values of the European Union. Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission president, called it shameful, clearly homophobic and discriminatory earlier today. Take a listen.
Human dignity, it is equality, and is the human fundamental rights. So we will not compromise on these principles. And I have said it before, and I want to repeat it. I strongly believe in a European Union that is clear that where you are who you want to be, and I strongly believe in a European Union where you are free to love whom you want.
And she has instructed that a letter be sent off to the Hungarian authorities expressing these legal concerns that Brussels have. So we could, in fact, see infringement proceedings coming down if this bill does come into effect.
And what can the EU actually do to punish Hungary?
Well, besides infringement proceedings, which in all reality, Jamie, are the easiest and swiftest thing to do at this point. There is also a new rule of law mechanism which was agreed to last year. This would allow the EU to cut off EU funds to Hungary if that is what is decided. But this is something that could be kind of tricky to pull off because that mechanism, it's still unclear when and how it is going to be implemented. There is also the nuclear option of triggering an Article 7 procedure, which would potentially lead to the suspension of certain rights, including things like voting rights. But again, this is something that would be very difficult to pull off because before that suspension of rights can happen, there needs to be a unanimous vote at the EU Council, excluding, of course, the country that is in question. And we have already seen Hungary and Poland teaming up. They're both under Article 7 procedures at the moment, teaming up to protect each other's countries from those proceedings going forward. So really, it is the infringement proceedings and old-fashioned pressure that is going to likely be the course going forward. But at this point, the issue has elbowed its way into a leader summit, which is going to be kicking off here in Brussels tomorrow. LGBT rights now on the menu during a working dinner. And since it is President Viktor Orban that has to give that final endorsement to this bill, you can expect that he's going to be getting an earful from his colleagues.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, thank you very much.
Well, let's bring in Penelope Liesch now, who's in Hungary. So how are these accusations being viewed there by both the public and politicians?
Robin, we've seen in the last few hours a very strongly worded statement from the Hungarian government in response to the actions and those comments by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Now, she did mention specifically that this bill that Hungary has passed is a shame. The Hungarian government flipping that around in their own statement, calling her comments a shame instead, saying that they've been based on false allegations and that this law does protect the rights of children, the rights of adults, and that it does not discriminate against anyone based on sexual orientation, as it doesn't affect anyone over the age of 18. So the Hungarian government's firmly standing by this legislation. We've seen thousands of people protesting in the last week in Hungary against this bill of law, and we've seen it again today taking off on social media, particularly on Viktor Orban's public Facebook page, people flooding comments on posts that have no relation to this issue at all with symbols of the rainbow. So certainly showing their support there, Robin.
And Penelope, we're just a couple of hours away now from the Germany-Hungary game in Munich. Has there been any reaction there to UEFA's decision not to allow the Allianz Arena to light up in rainbow colours?
Well, this football match is certainly becoming much bigger than sport. We can see today we've already got fans starting to arrive for that clash between Hungary and Germany in Munich. Now, Munich's mayor has called that decision not to allow the stadium to be lit in rainbow colours shameful, and instead there will be landmarks around the city lit up in those rainbow colours, and a rainbow flag is flying from Munich City Hall as we speak. On the Hungarian side, well, we're going to see a protest of the protest, really. The stadium behind me right now, a smaller stadium, football stadium in Budapest, and a couple of others around the country, and the Opera House will all be lit in the national colours of Hungary tonight, red, white and green. We've had Hungarian politicians very much agreeing with the decision from UEFA, saying that they were right not to assist any political provocation of Hungary. Viktor Orban, we understand, Hungary's Prime Minister, a huge fan of football. He's not attending this match in Munich tonight. That is unusual for him. The government has refused to be drawn on this, but it is understood that he is not attending that match because of this row that has erupted over the lighting of the stadiums. But as I say, it is drawing lots of political opinions from across the spectrum. Let's have a listen to the Vice President of the European Commission a little earlier on UEFA's decision.
I find it very difficult to understand what UEFA is trying to do by going against this initiative of the Munich City Council. Frankly, I do not find any reasonable excuse for that. They supported all the good causes, and all of a sudden, they make an issue out of this.
Now, we have seen UEFA coming through with their own statement again this afternoon, saying that they are proud to wear the colours of the rainbow and all that it signifies, that this was not a political decision to not allow the stadium to be lit, that it was done purely because it was a politically motivated statement against the Hungarian football team playing there today. So this game, as we head into it, certainly drawing a lot of opinions outside the sporting arena, and it could just be a warm-up for what may become a showdown between the Hungarian government and the European Union.
Penelope Liège in Budapest, thanks very much. Thousands of employees from across the UK travel industry are holding a day of action to pressure the government to reopen international travel and provide more financial support for the sector.
According to the industry umbrella body, ABTA, 195,000 travel jobs have been lost during the pandemic or are at risk. Rallies are being held in London, Edinburgh, Belfast and at airports around the country.
CGTN's correspondent Nicole Johnston is at the demonstration in London.
From airlines to travel operators, tour companies, ferries and airports, the UK tourist industry is here for a day of action. They're protesting against the British government's restrictions on international travel. People have joined in across the country, rallying at airports and outside Parliament. They're ramping up pressure on the government to make it easier for people to travel abroad for international holidays without quarantining when they come home.
Our message to the government as a travel agent is just please listen to our specific circumstances. We don't earn any money until people travel, and the lack of people travelling, we've not earned any money in 16 months.
The government has a traffic light system for travel, classifying countries as green, amber or red according to their COVID-19 risk. But right now, very few countries are green, and most of them won't accept British tourists anyway, except for Iceland.
The government tried to reintroduce the traffic light system 3-4 weeks ago with promises that they wouldn't make the same mistakes that they did the first time round, and unfortunately within 3 weeks, we had the situation where they'd moved it from green to amber with no notice for customers, and therefore you get this scramble of people trying to get back to the UK to beat the self-isolation deadline. That costs them money, it's a lot of stress for people. I think it's unfair on families.
Local operators and tour guides say the domestic travel industry is also suffering because no one wants to travel here while the UK has such strict quarantine rules.
We've been absolutely flattened. Tourists are just not coming. I've had no work since the 28th of February last year.
The travel industry is calling on the government to expand its travel green list and to extend furlough until April next year. It says that 200,000 jobs are at risk and hundreds of thousands of airline jobs as well. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Well, let's talk to Tom Jenkins, the CEO of the European Tourism Association, who joins us from Machynlleth in mid-Wales. Tom, good to see you. There's a pandemic that continues to kill many people in many parts of the world. Does your industry not have any sympathy with governments around the world who will say to you, look, health first, holidays are a luxury, sadly?
I think, of course, we've got huge sympathy with any government struggling with what is a major crisis. But I think all that these people are doing in Westminster today is pointing out that all measures in this area have a cost. And travel may be perceived as a luxury, but it is actually a vital part of the economy, not just in the UK, but throughout Europe. And I think what you were hearing today was just the tip of the iceberg of the impact that having no travel industry is going to have throughout the economy. I mean, if you look at London, for example, 50% of the spend in Oxford Street is tourists. 40% of the occupancy of theatres are tourists. And if you take tourists out of London, there's not a lot left there, or what there is just a shadow of its former self of dubious viability.
Difficult to do a snapshot of an entire continent, but how precarious is the travel industry right across Europe at the moment?
Well, I'm probably one of the few that think the travel industry is actually quite robust. It can cope with horrible shocks, and it will recover from this. But the consequences of this happening is going to be felt everywhere, particularly when combined with the decline of office occupancy in central cities. I think you're going to find the tourism, leisure tourism will recover, and it will start to recover the moment these restrictions are eased. but the consequences for what cities are going to look like in the near future is going to be very, very interesting. We're not sure what it is, but it will be different.
The UK government, if they were here, would say, look, the government showered the travel industry with millions and millions of pounds of furloughed taxpayer cash. Why should the airline industry be a special case here?
Well, I don't speak for the airline industry in particular. I think the only thing to be said is that the airline industry, and it's a complex, interesting, morally complex industry in some ways, the airline industry is utterly vital to get tourism going again, and tourism is utterly vital for the modern economy. So there is a £30 billion hole in the UK economy because we're not receiving any tourists. There's hundreds of billions of euros hole within the European economy, and everything is contingent on things getting back to work again. And work is not a luxury, it's a vital part of the way the modern economy works.
We're still not sure, though, what that new normal looks like, are we? I wonder, is the pandemic the start of the travel industry's upheaval? We've got carbon taxes, pollution taxes, all on the horizon, along with the perhaps permanent decline of business travel, where companies simply make staff work from home or do business on Zoom and no longer travel on airlines around the world.
I think the short answer is that tourism has survived shocks. Few have been as big and as horrific as this, but tourism has survived shocks, and it will survive this one. People will still need to travel to do business. You can't do everything impersonally, so to speak, virtual, effective though this process that I'm talking to you at the moment is. I think people will still want to do business in person, and people will certainly want to see the things they want to see and experience the experiences they want to have in person. So the demand is robust. Every market that my members work in, and they work in every market in the world that sells, where they can sell Europe, there is huge demand, huge pent-up demand for people who want to come back and do the things they want to do. They want to have a real experience again, and this is a universally held impulse. So I'm sure things will come back. It's what the process is going to be like before that happens, and this we don't know.
Tom Jenkins from the European Tourism Association in Machynlleth in mid-Wales, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Welcome back to work. Now, where's your vaccine certificate? Should you have the jabs to enter your office?
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Daily Motion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Russia says it fired warning shots at a British military ship that entered its territorial waters near the Crimean Peninsula. However, Britain's Ministry of Defence says no such shots were fired at HMS Defender, which is reportedly now being shadowed by Russian aircraft and 2 Coast Guard ships. Well, Julia Chapman is watching events in Moscow. So, Julia, what's the latest?
Well, Russia's Ministry of Defence said earlier on Wednesday that HMS Defender entered Russian territorial waters and went some 3 kilometers deep into them when the Russian border patrol sent them a warning that there could be weapons used if they didn't change course. Russia says that no response was received to this warning, and so the border patrol ship fired warning shots. 9 minutes later, it says an Su-24 warplane dropped what it called 4 warning bombs in the path of the British warship. It says then the ship changed course and left what it believes is Russian territorial waters and then carried on its way to the Black Sea country of Georgia. Now, this version of events has been disputed by the British government. The British Ministry of Defence says no warning shots were fired. It did acknowledge that there were gunnery exercises, as it called them, in the area that were being held by Russia, and there were reports that on board the warship there could be some shots heard, but they weren't believed to be aimed specifically at HMS Defender. So certainly a varying version of events from the British, who say that this was a fairly normal, routine journey for its ship, leaving the Ukrainian port of Odessa and traveling around the peninsula of Crimea. And of course, many of these issues are really stemming from the fact that there is a disagreement over who Crimea belongs to. Of course, Russia annexed the peninsula in 2014, and Britain and many other countries around the world do not acknowledge it as being Russian territory. Indeed, the British Defence Secretary says that this is Ukrainian territory that the British ship was travelling through.
OK, Julia Chapman in Moscow, thanks for updating us.
China's new ambassador to the UK has called for cooperation between China and the UK at an event marking the centenary of the Communist Party of China. Ambassador Zheng Zheguang has called for more effort from both sides in fighting the pandemic, promoting world economic recovery and tackling climate change.
Under the strong leadership of the CPC, China will embrace an even brighter future and realize the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. We are ready to join hands with our friends here in the UK, share development opportunities, and work for the long-term and steady development of our bilateral relationship.
The Nasdaq opened at a record high on Wall Street, with investors pouring back into technology stocks. Let's take you live to New York and our correspondent, the Oracle, John Terrace. John, investors, the US Federal Reserve is reassuring on inflation, and that's lifted these tech stocks by the look of it. What's going on?
Yes, quite exactly. Well, we had the S&P 500 technology sector. You know, there's 11 sectors in the S&P. Well, the technology sector is presently at an all-time high, and it was yesterday. And then the close of the Nasdaq on yesterday, which was Tuesday, of course, the composite, which we always quote, and the 100 that we never quote, both closed at all-time highs as well. And there's 2 reasons for this. One is that the 10-year government bond here, the yield, the interest rate, is down to 1.45%. If you remember, a couple of months ago, it had been spiking above 1.6%, and that tends to force a sell-off in the tech sector. It wasn't so much that it went to 1.6%, it was more the speed with which it went to 1.6% and beyond that spooked people. But then beyond that, Chairman Powell, the head of the Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, was testifying on Capitol Hill on Tuesday, and he was he mollified everybody here about the worry about inflation. In other words, he wasn't remotely worried about inflation in the testimony that he gave, but he was worried about not enough people around the world being vaccinated. So for that reason, right now here on Wall Street, we have the Dow and the S&P 500 essentially flat, but the Nasdaq is up by 0.25%, and it's at the moment heading for a second-day record and 3 days in a row in the green. Jamie.
Now, something that's got a lot of us talking here, one of the biggest banks on Wall Street has said its staff need to be fully vaccinated if they want to go back into the office. I wonder, how's that playing out there?
Well, remember, this is a banking city, and the banks drive pretty much what happens in New York, more than anywhere else in the world, I suspect. This is Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, and it is quite remarkable in many ways. They are setting the pace of the return in a way in which I think their staff didn't really see coming. Goldman Sachs had their staff back in about 2 Mondays ago. There were lines going into the buildings, I'm told, as people had to attest that they were vaccinated. But now the new bid here is that Morgan Stanley is saying no vaccine, then you don't come into any of our buildings in Manhattan or up in Westchester County to the north of the city. Now, my understanding is that they're doing this on the honours system, which means staff will have to attest that they are vaccinated for now, but after July the 1st, they're going to have to come up with some kind of proof. That's okay, because if you're vaccinated in New York, there's an app that you can download proving that you've been vaccinated. Of course, you get a card as well. And the courts here have ruled that it's perfectly okay for companies to do this in America because it's a health issue. It used to be that you used to have to prove that you had been vaccinated against smallpox, for example. Now, Morgan Stanley's headquarters is a huge building in Times Square. It's covered in ticker machines showing the latest on the Dow and the Nasdaq and the S&P. And if you just look through this window here, through that building, through that window, is the original Morgan Stanley headquarters on Wall Street. This new rule will apply to staff and contributors and customers and clients. And the idea is to have COVID-free zones within the buildings. No need for a mask, no need for social distancing, and, basically an area where you could be pretty certain that you're not going to get very sick or end up in hospital from anybody who has perhaps not been vaccinated. Jamie?
And John, just to be clear, Morgan Stanley's saying no more working from home. Staff must attend the office in person. Is that right?
Well, that's right. And it's so strange because for the last couple of months, staff have been talking about never going back to the office because they say they're more productive at home. A friend of mine reckons she does 3 hours work a day more because she doesn't have the commute than she used to. Another friend of mine has just closed a huge Wall Street deal and they never met the clients, not once. It was all done on WeChat and WhatsApp and email and text. So that's what's been going on. But the bosses, you see, Jamie, are having absolutely none of this, as it's proving to be clear now. And the Morgan Stanley CEO is called James Gorman. On top of what's happened today, he's been very blunt about staff coming back. He says, if you could go to a restaurant in New York, you could come to our office. If you want New York wages, you have to come to our office. And he'll be disappointed if everyone's not back in the office by September the 6th, which is the major holiday of Labor Day. The thing is, the banks here, which drive things in New York, as I've said, have decided that banking is a business that's done in person. Gorman says this is where we teach, this is where our interns learn, and this is where we develop people. And I think that the tech industry, which has been very sanguine about this up to now, they're allowing their people to stay at home forever. I think the tech industry is waiting for somebody to take a lead on this, and it is now the banks. And I think in time you'll see the tech industry follow suit as well. Jamie.
Interesting stuff. John Terrett in New York, thank you very much for that.
We heard something from John there about how this is playing out in the United States, but various governments are taking different approaches over whether a vaccine is mandatory before returning to the office.
Russia has said some people won't be allowed to return unless they've been vaccinated or have immunity. The government says discrimination is inevitable.
The Italian government has said all health workers must get coronavirus jabs. Some critics have questioned whether it's legal to only apply the rules to one industry. The government says health workers could be suspended without pay for the rest of the year if they refuse.
And the UK Health Secretary says it's sensible and reasonable for vaccines to become compulsory for care home staff across England. The government says it'll consider expanding the rule to the National Health Service.
Amanda Lennon is an employment partner at the law firm and wealth advisor Spencer West. She told me why it's a controversial move for companies to take a tough stand on vaccination.
I think it's a risky policy at this point in time because the UK government hasn't mandated the vaccine in the workplace. I think we need to be, as employers, considerate of the different views of employees. It's tricky because on the one hand, if everybody is vaccinated based on the information that we've got available to us today, then that will enable businesses to put in place fewer COVID-secure measures. But on the other hand, there are employees who may not want to have the vaccine at all, or may be very wary about it, or very nervous about having it. And it's possible, we'll have to see how the case law develops in this area, but that not wanting to have the vaccine could be a philosophical or even religious belief in some cases that turns out to be protected by the Equality Act, and therefore it would be discrimination to try and force the vaccine on those employees. And we'll have to wait and see what happens with tribunal cases in those areas, but I think that they may come up in the near future if employers push those sort of policies.
For some employees, though, the idea of working in a workplace where everyone is vaccinated might well be seen as an advantage.
Absolutely. If you have the example of Pimlico Plumbers, the CEO there, Charlie Mullins, has been very clear about no jab, no job. And I can understand that where employers are asking employees to go into people's homes, as his workers would need to do their work, then there is a real argument for having the vaccine. However, because it's not mandated, it's going to be very difficult to just implement that. That's going to require a period of consultation and the views of both the detractors and those in favour taken into account. Ultimately, I think if, as an employer, you're introducing a vaccine policy, you should do a consultation and understand what the views of the workforce are.
In the case of the Wall Street bank Morgan Stanley, it's not only banning unvaccinated staff from its New York office, but clients too. This is a pretty risky move.
I think it is quite risky, and also those statements have been made very publicly, which is also a concern to me. Businesses like banks and other commercial enterprises will clearly be thinking about the interests of their clients and how to return to normal as much as possible following the pandemic. But in my view, the world will not be the same again. Ways of working and employee expectations won't be the same again. And so to have such a broad brush approach about coming to the office, I think, is risky. From a client perspective, if you're being told you can't come to your bank to have a meeting unless you've been vaccinated, that could in some cases sway whether the client takes their business elsewhere.
The European Union looks set to extend the grace period to allow a continued export of chilled meats from Britain to Northern Ireland. It's been a contentious part of the post-Brexit trade arrangements, with negotiations so far failing to find a solution. The EU's lead negotiator has recommended an extension to give Britain time to implement the Northern Ireland Protocol, which involves the nations trading under both EU and UK regulations.
The Eurozone economy is booming at a pace not seen for the past 15 years. The Eurozone composite PMI has jumped to 59.2 in June from 57.1 in May, the highest level since 2006. Businesses from manufacturing to the services industry are reporting a surge in consumer demand as vaccine rollouts and the lifting of restrictions continue.
More than 5 million people around the world became millionaires for the first time in 2020. That brings the total number of millionaires to just over 56 million. Research by Credit Suisse found that in 2020 more than 1% of adults were millionaires for the first time, with wealth creation appearing to be completely detached from the economic downturn caused by the pandemic. Stock markets bouncing back and rocketing house prices helped boost wealth.
The Bank of England has released a new £50 note featuring a portrait of Alan Turing. The mathematician and computer scientist is celebrated for designing machines to break secret messages during the Second World War. The central bank governor said Turing was treated appallingly during his lifetime because he was gay.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, final preparations in Tokyo, but can organisers turn public anxiety into Olympic anticipation?
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens.
4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, make you loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome! We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: a diplomatic row over Euro 2020 and homosexuality. Hungary's Prime Minister cancels his visit to the big match in Germany, and the EU says Hungary goes against European values.
The UK denies Russia fired warning shots near a British warship in the Black Sea.
And leaders from the UK travel industry rally in Westminster to protest against ongoing COVID restrictions.
America's top diplomat has arrived in Europe, his second visit in a week, as the US continues to try and woo traditional allies. Antony Blinken is in Germany for talks with Chancellor Angela Merkel on issues including the controversial Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline between Russia and Germany. His visit also coincided with a Berlin conference on Libya. Let's go live now to our correspondent Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt. So Ryan, what did Antony Blinken have to say about the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline?
Yeah, the new Secretary of State, Robin, had a message saying, okay, go ahead with the project, but be cautious. Because effectively, he is giving the U.S. blessing after many, many months, but this has been a long time coming. If you remember, the Trump administration fought hard against this project, and it's only recently, since President Joe Biden took office, that there have been negotiations about the U.S. at least agreeing to support the project and not sanction some German companies. But that said, the U.S. Secretary of State had some stern words for the project, which is slated to be finished by the summer. He called it a strategic geopolitical project that undermines Ukraine, of course, because they, for a long time, were a source of a lot of oil flowing from Russia to Europe. He said that the goal here should be to make sure that Europe is not taken advantage of in an energy policy that Russia is constructing. Take a listen to his words just a little bit earlier.
to do what we can to make sure that the end result is that Europe's energy security is not undermined. In fact, it's strengthened, that Ukraine's position is not weakened, that it's actually reinforced. And that is the nature of the conversations that we're having with our German partners. Our goal remains to ensure that Russia cannot use energy as a coercive tool, as a weapon against Ukraine or anyone else in Europe.
And Ryan, Secretary Blinken's also been at this conference on Libya. What more can you tell us about it?
Yeah, Anthony Blinken is one of the highest representatives in attendance. It really was a who's who of the UN Security Council countries, including a number of key partners who were interested in these negotiations over the future of Libya and its government. We just got the readout of the meeting, and these discussions went on for a couple hours. They noted that the situation in Libya has improved dramatically over the course of 2021. Oil production is flowing again. There has been a strong ceasefire, and really a lot of the hostilities that were proving to be a barrier towards any progress have stopped for the time being. What they outlined as a direction of where they're going, they're hoping to really have the political dialogue focus on Libya itself, have not just be the proxy powers passing on these words, but having Libya decide what it wants and be able to reestablish some of that sovereignty. That also potentially may include down the line, at the request of France and with the support of the United States, some of those foreign troops who are providing security services moving out and handing things over to Libyan security forces here. They did very much note that there's more to be done, notably ensuring that some of the causes of conflict are erased for good, but there is moves towards the future, and notably they really want to ensure that while there is the caretaker government right now that is overseeing what looks to be a pretty stable state, that when elections go ahead in December, that they are smooth, that they are legit, and they are able to enter a new phase with a new government.
Okay, thanks very much, Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt.
9 Catalan separatist leaders have been released from prison after they received pardons from Spain's Prime Minister. The group had been jailed for their part in the region's attempt to gain independence from Spain 4 years ago. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says the decision to pardon them is the best opportunity to defuse the Catalan dispute.
The EU's Disease Control Agency has called for Europe's vaccination rollout to be sped up, saying the highly transmissible Delta variant of COVID is expected to account for 90% of all cases by the end of August. The European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control warned that people who have had a single jab are still at risk of infection and hospitalisation.
China's President Xi Jinping has called for closer cooperation among participants of the Belt and Road Initiative. His remarks were conveyed by Foreign Minister Wang Yi at a conference in Beijing. Wang said the trade volume between Belt and Road countries has reached nearly $1.4 trillion last year.
The first person to stand trial under Hong Kong's national security law has pleaded not guilty to charges of terrorism and inciting secession. It's claimed Tong Ying Kit drove a motorbike into police officers while carrying a protest flag. His trial will take place without a jury, which is a departure from Hong Kong's normal legal practice that is now permitted.
Hong Kong's newspaper Apple Daily will cease production on Thursday. The paper's offices were raided last week over allegations that several reports had breached a national security law. The EU says the closure seriously undermines media freedom and pluralism. China responded, saying the EU should abide by international law and stop interfering in China's internal affairs.
There's a month to go until the Olympic Games begin in Tokyo. It's a year later than planned, but the pandemic has not gone away and significant concerns remain among the Japanese public. Maya Yoshida reports from the Japanese capital.
Tokyo is putting the finishing touches to its Olympics preparations. Organizers have switched to fully operational mode with just a month to go. But winning over the public is another matter. Although latest polls suggest rising public support, partly due to pickup in Japan's vaccination drive, the majority of the people in Japan are still against hosting the Games this year. A Kyodo News poll found that 86% of the people are worried about a COVID-19 spike caused by hosting the event.
Athletes will be forced to compete under obstacles, and challenges will differ, depending on where they come from. The games shouldn't go ahead until fair games are guaranteed.
Medical experts have advised this Olympics should be held without any spectators to reduce risks. But organizers have decided to go against this and announced they will allow local fans into the venues. Ticket sales from local fans are crucial for organizers and sponsors, and having no spectators into the venues would have put even more of a burden on Japanese taxpayers. There will be no foreign spectators in the city, but up to 10,000 local fans will be allowed in the venues. Organizers want fans to enjoy the action, but still stay safe.
Vaccination is also underway. So far, we've established a system that would not strain the medical systems.
But one doctor we spoke to at Daido Hospital in Tokyo doesn't agree. It's been an exhausting year for staffs here. And they say fewer infection cases in recent weeks have not made their lives any easier.
Before the pandemic, we had doctors visiting from bigger hospitals who helped out with operations from time to time. But when this stopped because of the pandemic, we struggled with the lack of manpower and long working hours. When bigger hospitals stop accepting seriously ill patients from smaller hospitals like ours, that's when the issue grows.
Even with limited spectators, tens of thousands of people will soon be flying into Tokyo from more than 200 countries. And with unprecedented social distancing measures applied and the public in a less celebratory mood, Tokyo 2020 will look and feel a lot different to previous Olympics. Mai Yoshida for CGTN Tokyo.
You're watching Global Business Europe. Still ahead.
Going, gone. The beginnings of the internet, the source code of the World Wide Web is up for sale.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The inventor, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, is auctioning his original source code for the World Wide Web in the form of a digital artifact, a non-fungible token, or NFT.
The sale at Sotheby's will be the first time the web creator has been able to raise money directly from his invention because the source code was never patented. Well, here's Juliet to tell us more.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Robin. Well, despite the recent sell-off in cryptocurrencies, digital collectibles continue to fetch millions of dollars. But I think first I need to explain what an NFT is. Now, a fungible asset is something like money. So, Jamie and Robin, if you gave me a tenner, we could exchange that for 2 fivers and it's worth the same, right? But if something is non-fungible, you can't do that. It has unique properties that can't be interchanged with something else, like a master's painting. You can get a print or a photo, but there's only ever one original. Now, NFTs are one-of-a-kind assets in the digital world. They can be bought and sold, but they've no tangible, physical form of their own. And investors are splurging millions on them. Now, almost 650 million worth of the cryptocurrency Ethereum has been spent on digital artworks to date. In March, there was the record-breaking sale of Beeple's Everydays, the first 5,000 days. That went for $69.3 million. And Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey sold his first tweet, and that went for $2.9 million. Well, let's talk to Sotheby's Global Head for Science and Pop Culture, which is a fantastic job title, Cassandra Hatton. Thanks ever so much for talking to us. Look, in a traditional auction, you might get a painting or a print, you might get a sculpture, or maybe even a manuscript. What do you get with an NFT? Talk us through how it works.
For this specific NFT, what you will be getting are Sir Tim's original time-stamped and dated files containing the full source code for the World Wide Web. You will be getting a visualization that he created using Python from the original source code, where you can view the whole code all in one place and zoom in, zoom out. There is an animation that was created, so a video where you can watch the full code being typed up on a black screen with white letters. That video lasts 30 minutes and 25 seconds. That's the time it takes to type up the full code. And then there's a letter, a document that Sir Tim recently wrote explaining the history of the web, looking back and reflecting on the importance of this invention. So these are the 4 assets that come when you purchase this NFT.
You call them assets, but you can't touch it, you can't keep it, you can't hang it on your wall. So this is really about provenance and ownership, isn't it?
Yes. I think this is a really interesting NFT because the primary asset is something that has existed. You know, Sir Tim wrote the code over the course of 1990 to 1991. So it's something that was born digital. It's like a manuscript, like a Darwin manuscript or a Newton manuscript. It is the original document created by the creator, and it's kind of been locked until this technology of NFTs has come along and really allowed us to be able to certify that this is the original document coming from the creator. So it has brought up some philosophical questions about, well, you know, how do you determine what is original, what isn't? For me, as somebody whose background is in the history of science and in books and manuscripts, this is a manuscript to me. You know, it is the item that was written by the person who created the code, and it was created in a digital format. Darwin wrote his manuscripts in a paper and ink format. It's a different format, but no different than an original document by any other scientist. And we're just lucky to have this NFT that enables us to be able to sell it.
It's really quite wild, isn't it? But do you see the rise of NFTs as a form of digital collectible? Do you see that's digital's answer to collectibles, or do you think it's a bubble that's maybe about to burst?
I think there are a lot of things going on with NFTs. Certainly, it's tied to cryptocurrency, and so anytime you see something tied to something volatile like that, you're going to see ups and downs. When I'm looking at NFTs, I don't think about them as NFTs. I look at what the contents and the substance are. So really, something like the PAC sale we did, that's contemporary art that is tied to an NFT. The World Wide Web is an object. It's like a manuscript that happens to be tied to an NFT. NFTs can be anything. So for me, it's really about what the substance of the item is, that the NFT-ness is secondary to me when we're talking about the value of this object.
It'll be exciting to see how much it raises. Well, Cassandra Hatton, thanks very much for joining us from Sotheby's. Now let's stay with science, because to mark International Women in Engineering Day, I spoke to Lucy Hawking, the daughter of famed theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, and a powerhouse in her own right, particularly as a science populariser. I asked her to describe what a career in STEM, so science, technology, engineering and maths, could look like.
Well, there's so much opportunity there in so many different fields of endeavour. We found some sort of very interesting kind of more anecdotal research to show that kids tend to be drawn into science by something like black holes or aliens, something that's really attention-grabbing, space travel. But then they tend to diversify into all sorts of different scientific disciplines, whether that be food production, whether that be medicine, whether that be astrophysics. And so that's why we start with what we started with. We start with astrophysics, but then we hope that kids who've read our books will branch out into all sorts of different areas, because what we know about the world today, what we know about the complex challenges that we face as a society, as planet Earth, is that they're going to take a unified endeavour from all of us to find the solutions. The solutions will lie in science and technology, and it's going to take a future generation of scientists, of kids who grow up to be exceptionally gifted in lots of different areas to come up with the solutions to these problems.
Is there a message there for big business and for governments to be more targeted with their investments?
I think certainly I'd love to see businesses, corporates, or people engaging in philanthropic endeavour centred around education, centred around STEM, giving young people the opportunity to engage with subjects which otherwise they might think, these are not for me, I don't see my reflection in that. We want women, we want girls, we want to bring them in. This is an exciting and a vibrant career. There's so much that you can do in this world. I think that's really important because it's a kind of form of role modelling for girls to say, are you interested in food? Is that something you can see yourself working in? Here are the opportunities.
So what impact would you say that the pandemic has had on the quest for science education?
In the short term, I think one thing that worries me is that already we have inequality in education, and I think that will have been worsened by the pandemic, that some kids will have been able to access an excellent education online, other kids will have had little or no education for all sorts of different reasons. And so that is a real concern to me, because we don't want to go forward into a world where only a super elite have received an excellent education, only the super elite are able to engage with the complex questions of science and technology, and everyone else is kind of disenfranchised. Obviously, when we look at food production, that was really spotlit during the pandemic. How do we feed the whole world? What do we do when supply chains break down? How do we preserve and store food? You know, these are going to be really big questions, because we can't just assume, right, that was the pandemic, that's over, this is never going to happen again. We've got existential threats that could materialise in the future. So it's really important, especially when you're talking about something like feeding the world, like educating the world, that we take on board what we've learned and we find solutions to these problems.
And finally, Tokyo has welcomed twins into the world. Giant panda Shinshin gave birth to cubs in the Japanese capital. It was the first panda birth at the zoo in 4 years and the first twin birth they've ever had. The gender of the cubs has not yet been established. Twin births are common in pandas, but mothers often abandon one cub, so keepers will help look after both.
The headlines again. A diplomatic row over Euro 2020 and homosexuality. Hungary's Prime Minister cancels his visit to the big match in Germany, and the EU says Hungary goes against European values.
The UK denies Russia fired warning shots near a British warship in the Black Sea.
And leaders from the UK travel industry rally in Westminster to protest against COVID restrictions.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.